Hi everyone, this is Philip. I'm the administrator at Housing Colorado. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Housing Colorado virtual site tour from haunted to housing, restoring Tammen Hall. Before I begin, I have a few housekeeping items to review. We will be recording the webinar today, so all participants will be muted. If you have a question, you can use the chat function. Our presenters today will be monitoring the chat and responding to your questions and comments throughout, as well as being able to come back at the end if they missed any. If you get disconnected at any time, you can rejoin the webinar while we are in progress, or if needed, you can review the recorded webinar after today at our website. We will send out the email as soon as the recorded webinar is available online. For those of you who are less familiar with the work of Housing Colorado, please check out our website, in particular our events page, to see our upcoming education offerings. I'm going to put a link to that page in the chat now. Also, if there are any particular topics that you're interested in, let us know. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to thank Neenan Archistructure for sponsoring and organizing this event. These site tours would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. Thank you also to our speakers from Neenan and Mgl Partners for sharing with us today. And now I'm going to turn things over to Donna Smith from Neenan to get us started.
Good morning and welcome to From Haunted to Housing, Restoring Tammen Hall. I'm Donna Smith, Vice President of Neenan Archistruction, an integrated design build firm. Wanted to start this morning with some logistics. If you have a question, please submit it through the question box to the right on GoToMeeting. We'll be answering those questions after the presentation during our question and answer period. We hope today that we're able to share with you the challenges faced and the resulting solutions that we had during this project, including financing, historic preservation, managing unknowns encountered, feasibility, schedule, and timeline. Our development partner on this project is Mgl Partners. Mgl has developed almost $700 million of multifamily rental properties in Colorado, including Class A market rate housing, senior housing, workforce housing, and affordable low-income housing tax credit housing. Mgl offers financial and development consulting services to Colorado-based nonprofits and housing authorities focused on creating and preserving affordable and workforce housing, which has resulted in over 1,400 units. Speakers from Mgl today with us are Danny Vachon, Development Manager, and Greg Glade, Co-founder and Principal at Mgl Partners. Joining us today from Neenan and starting off our presentation is Michelle Forrest. She's our design manager on Tammen Hall with Neenan Archistruction. Michelle?
Thank you, Donna. I'd like to start off with a brief overview of Tammen Hall's history. It all started when the late wife of Harry Tammen donated money to construct a dormitory for nurses students of Children's Hospital in his. Harry Tammen was also the first publisher of the Denver Post. The construction was completed in 1932, and in 1953 the nursing school closed and the building was turned into medical offices. In 2005, with the support of the neighboring communities, the building was placed in the historic Denver landmark. However, in this same year, the building was vacated where it sat for over a decade. In 2017, Tammen Hall was acquired by Mgl Partners. And in 2018, with the partnership of the Neenan Company, the renovations began. With the completion in 2019, and with the recognition from state and national landmarks for historics. Now, there was a lot of research and verifications and partners involved before Neenan got on board. Greg and Danny, can you speak to the process and the efforts that your team took in this effort?
Sure. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Donna, as well. Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Glade. This is Danny Vachon. We're with Mgl Partners. As Michelle mentioned, we acquired the building in 2017, and it's really interesting to go back and look at the history of that building. I mean, that is exactly how it appeared when we first toured this back in 2015. I remember well some of the first tours. At that time, the building had actually sat empty for in excess of 10 years, closer to 12 years. It was blighted, boarded up. The first tour that we went on, I remember well, there were some homeless people nearby, and unfortunately the inside of the building was completely dark because of the fact that the power had been shut off many years before as part of the overall redevelopment of the campus. And so we had to have flashlights. What we were not made aware of actually before the tour is that it had actually been a training site for various first responders. And so we're going through this dark building. It was actually summer, so it wasn't super cold. There's no heat. It was actually very hot. And I remember walking down these corridors, and they were eerie. And so maybe about the third floor, we're going through floor by floor, and I peered around one of the corners, and there was a leg sticking out. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what do we do? Is that person alive? Are they not? Do we go attempt to help them right away? Are they going to be startled? And so, all those thoughts are going through your mind. And so, of course, you ultimately go up and you're like, you got to help this person. And I go around the corner, and the leg was just a leg. There was no body attached. And for a moment, that freaked me out even more. But then I realized that it was a fake leg, and that they had been using some of these body parts for training purposes. And there were different pieces probably left around as jokes throughout time. But remember very distinctly when I first saw what I thought was a whole body and then a body part, there was a lot of shock going through my system, especially in a dark environment where there's really only light was the flashlights. And then what I also realized, I'd done just a little bit of research, but it really kind of set me on edge because prior to going to visit the building for the first time, I did just a little bit of research online, and this building had been a noted site for paranormal activity. So I was on heightened alert, and throughout the rest of the tour, I can assure you I noticed every noise, every spider, and we were very cognizant of where we were in the building. And I don't remember a lot about the tour in terms of the building. It actually sort of ruined the first experience of how's the building laid out, because I just wanted to make sure that there were no ghosts, and we were all staying together. So thank gosh Michelle and her team came back through in much greater detail to ultimately help us map out what the concept was and where it could potentially go. But there was definitely some. It only could have been better if it was around Halloween time, quite honestly, given the ghost stories. Oh, by the way, the ghost is a friendly ghost. It was a sister who originally lived in the dorm in its original purpose and fell down the elevator shaft, and she's actually quite a jokester. And so during construction, I think Michelle can probably relate to some of these stories as well. I would, on occasion ask some of the subcontractors if they'd seen any activity, and they said that on occasion tools or things would go missing and that she would hide them in obscure places. So I don't know to this day if they were joking me because they knew the story of I was concerned about paranormal activity originally, or if that was really happening. But in either case, it's a friendly ghost, and I like the pranks. So we haven't had any actually recent stories from property management of continuing to be haunted. So just go. I mean, Danny, I don't know if you have anything you want to add at this point. I'll keep rambling.
No. I'm curious to hear about. I wasn't here at that time, so just how you kind of went from looking at this vacant building and dark and kind of spooky, and then figuring out what you were going to do with it, how you were going to renovate it.
Sure, and that's probably. I'm going to give you a little bit of background before we brought Neenan on board. So originally, SCL had taken down this building as part of a larger acquisition, and they wanted to redevelop their entire campus. The neighborhood really did not want to see this historic building go away. So part of the trade-off with the neighborhood was that ultimately SCL, as the owner, would renovate or repurpose the building, and they would be allowed to go ahead with the renovation of their campus, which they did. It's about an $850 million tremendous hospital asset right in the heart of Denver, one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in Denver. So, they had looked at a lot of uses over time. They had looked at office, hotel, trying to repurpose the building in many different ways. And it really had a lot of challenges, which Michelle can attest to, and Neenan. but no one was really able to come up with a concept that made sense. And I remember specifically meeting with a gentleman named Al Davis, who was the facilities director with SCL, and we went out to their office in Broomfield at the time. They said, listen, I wish you luck. We've looked at every imaginable concept here. The building is old, it's structurally challenged, it's designated as historic, so it's very limited in terms of what you can do with that building. And we explained to him that we had flexibility with our floor plans, and given the location of that building, again, one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in all of Denver, super attractive area, near healthcare, retail, jobs, that we felt like an affordable rental housing option was something we wanted to explore. And as we got into greater detail on the market analysis, it just became very apparent that a senior housing use was very appropriate, and that was further exacerbated by the point that there's really very limited parking around the building. And so, there was no parking underneath, there was only on-street parking. So what we then did is we talked to SCL about providing a small amount of parking in one of their parking lots as the primary parking, and then we would have secondary parking on the street as opposed to having the primary parking on the street. So given the fact that seniors are typically less vehicular, have fewer cars, certainly travel less in that neighborhood, the senior affordable housing options sort of started to gel, and we really started looking at that concept in much greater detail.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just talk a little bit about really kind of what the next steps were. Once we realized that senior housing was an ideal use, we really needed to find a contractor and architectural firm that understood historic renovations, but also understood affordable housing, understood construction. These historic renovations are incredibly complicated and very difficult. And I would really like to say that we are very thankful for Neenan and the expertise, particularly Michelle as our day-to-day contact. This was a really challenging project, and it really, I'm not sure would have been successful without their creativity and stick-to-itiveness in this project. And as we got in deeper and deeper into the project, we realized that it was getting more and more complicated, starting out with just the asbestos remediation. It was in more areas than we anticipated. The cost of that, was going up. And then as we started moving into actually executing floor plans, the structural enhancements, the types of systems that Neenan had to really manage and manage the consultants to bring forth while managing costs was just an incredible challenge. So I'd like to thank Neenan for that. And you've seen the result, but there's a lot of hours, and I'm sure Michelle was up a lot of sleepless nights trying to work through some of those really complicated clearances, air handling, electrical, corridors, the structural enhancement. Michelle, you and your team just did such a great job, so thank you.
Right. Well, Michelle, why don't you kind of take it from here and talk about how, when MGL hired you guys, how you kind of proceeded and what your path to get us to, understanding all the quirks of the building and the costs.
Sure. So initially we got the phone call from MGL saying, you guys are the ones. We want you to come look at this building. It's in Denver. We just did our own kind of quick Google search even before we went to the site. And again, we found some of the same knowledge about it being paranormal and things like that. And I had previously worked on another kind of haunted historic project, so I was already excited. Also, the building has this very distinct Art Deco look, and it's one of really my favorite designs and eras of the architecture. So I was pretty game already. But we met on site. It was our first introduction to Tammen Hall, and meeting with Greg's team. And as he mentioned, it was kind of the spookiness of the building. It was boarded up. It was dark. We had to close the door behind us to make sure we didn't have any additional visitors with us. It was just kind of a very surreal, interesting experience. And so if you can imagine, you already know the building is a little haunted. It doesn't have lights. It's a little drafty. So you have that kind of already that sense. And it was kind of like walking through a paranormal experience just on day one, which was kind of exciting for me. And so once we made our way through and we met on the front steps, I immediately was hooked and was like, let's get started. So that's kind of the start. It was pretty fun. I would say the first task was really to start digging in and developing the facilities assessment. The facilities assessment is really the first steps in discovering the unknowns of what we can find. And the way that we go about that at Neenan is we invite everybody that's going to be involved, the big hitters, the mechanical engineers and their subcontractor, and we treat this as a full design build experience. So what we do is we invited all of those players on board, invited them to the building. They again got their own spookiness feeling of it, and kind of started to create documents, take photographs, really hone in on what it was going to take to develop this project. And with that, this is really the development and really the book and kind of almost the development of the Bible of the project. Like, this is what is going to guide us into making sure that we are continuing with checks and balances on cost and schedule. This document is really that piece of it. And so for us, this is where I think Neenan really excels in bringing in those partners, working together, and trying to develop those solutions earlier. Once the report was really kind of starting to compile, we continued to work with Mgl as the developments occurred, and really kind of made sure that this document was a representation of all of us, and that everybody was aligned to it and was accepting of this document. So this document was really a piece to the overall application. And this is something that Danny and Greg, you can kind of speak to, is when we give you that facilities assessment and really said, okay, we're going in and we are going to apply, and what that kind of process looked like for you and what that entailed, because it was a pretty intense and lengthy process just to get awarded.
Thank you, Michelle. So, just really kind of want to start with where she left off. When we originally looked at this concept back in 2015, and by the way, there's a really key principle that I want to mention, Kurt Franz, who actually identified this opportunity and really worked on it for several months before I even became involved, and worked even harder with Michelle and their team to make this work. So I'm really representing a lot of the work that Kurt did, but I really think that he deserves a big shout out, because Kurt had a tremendous lift along with Michelle as sort of the primary drivers of our representative firms here in making this work. When we started the original concept, when Kurt and I started looking at financing options back in 2015, 2016, we started narrowing in, as I mentioned, on a senior housing execution. We looked at just a straight tax-exempt 4% tax credit execution. And it would have worked, honestly, at that time, even at a higher budget. But, these projects take a lot of time. And Michelle sort of alluded to that. The initial stab was to determine through a good firm what the PCNA looked like, so we could get an idea of the scope, and then how to craft the units around that, and really pursue a renovation. Well, that takes a lot of time, and it especially takes a lot of time when you're dealing with historic constraints, because you have other governing bodies that need to have a say and a sign off on what you intend to do. So as time started to move on, the tax reform of 2017 occurred, which immediately dropped pricing overnight as an initial reaction on the tax credits. So we started to look at low-income housing state tax credits as another option for financing. And really, by the time this project ultimately came to fruition, I'll list a whole litany here of all the financing sources, but Another key player that deserves such a tremendous amount of credit in making this transaction work is SCL themselves. When we first went to them, we talked about purchasing the building and leasing the ground because they, as an affiliate of the Catholic Church, are not able to sell the real property. They could have sold the building, but not the real property. So the first thing we ended up doing is buying the building, but asking for a basically 95% seller carryback loan, which would help us finance this project. We then went to our capital sources, and we're obviously bringing in historic tax credits, state historic tax credits, federal low-income housing tax credits, state low-income housing tax credits, which are administered through CHAFA, and a land lease. We got really to the, I would say 6 months from the time when we were going to start construction. And because of the fact that construction costs were continuing to go up and there were various physical constraints, some of which we've alluded to, there was still a gap that was unfortunately created. And SCL deserves a big shout out because they helped us bridge that gap with a seller loan, a cash loan, to help bridge that gap. So again, once again, just all the players really working in concert from the beginning to make this project work. And again, I'll go through that whole litany of capital sources once again. But this was a long process, and there were lots of phone calls with Michelle saying, hey, our budget is what it is. We just can't afford anymore. And inevitably, with any renovation of this nature, the contingency used is just so fast and it's alarming. It really takes just that entire team approach to manage that. But again, it's worth it. I mean, the project turned out tremendously, and I think we'll see some interior photos a little bit later in the project. So as I mentioned, I just want to have a quick shout out to the key stakeholders from a financial standpoint to help make this work. SCL Health, of course, as I mentioned, Citibank, who is our construction lender as well as the permanent lender on the project, CHAFA, who administers, as I mentioned, the federal low-income housing tax credits and state tax credits. They also provided bond cap to make the transaction work from a tax-exempt issuance standpoint. Advantage Capital, they were our state low-income housing tax credit investor and historic tax credit investor, state historic tax credit investor. Midwest Housing Equity Group, long-standing relationship with them, tremendous partner. They bought the federal low-income housing tax credits and the historic tax credits. We went to the city of Denver for a loan as well, and they were kind enough to work with us on that. And then finally, Denver Housing Authority, who also provided a real estate tax exemption to help us bridge that gap. So that's the litany of capital sources that we went to. We needed each and every one of them to make this work. So they just deserve such a tremendous thank you. Really just want to kind of move on to maybe some of the building systems, Michelle, if you want to sort of move into that, and then I can clean up with some other stuff on the tail end.
Sounds great. Thank you, Greg. So one thing that was a little unusual on this particular project as it relates to building system is if we remember back in 2005 when Children's Hospital vacated Tammen Hall and that remaining campus was demolished, as Greg alluded to. Well, part of that demolition was the main building that housed the major operating systems, such as the mechanical and water supplies that really fed Tammen Hall. Well, that left Tammen Hall with no connection to the city utility infrastructure. So that means all new water, all new sewer, all new electrical was a really big cost to the project and something that took a lot of coordination and effort, not just with me and Mgl, but with St. Joe's Hospital, which is SCL, as well as the city utility departments. So that was something that was quite unusual with an existing building, that this project had that at the start of the many challenges. So before the major design progression started, we hired a company to come in and scan the building to create a 3D model to provide a more accurate information to develop the plans. This didn't solve all of the future unknowns, but it certainly captured a lot for the team to address early, especially with floor plan layouts, just to understand a little bit more of those constraints and get a good flow of what those unit layouts will be. So the building is constructed of concrete columns supporting both concrete floor and roof systems. This provided great bones and great structure, but it also challenged us with the new mechanical systems. So with the new heating shafts, the new electrical runways, the fire alarm systems, all of that gave great challenge to navigating through this concrete structure. The ceiling heights were particularly interesting. So on the upper 6 floors, the ceiling heights were approximately 8 feet, which doesn't seem unusual. But however, the challenge is that those building systems had to be installed below that ceiling. What the team did to really make sure and ensure a clean and organized finish is that we worked really diligently during the construction with myself, the foreman, to make sure we knew who was going where and how their routing was going to do to keep the cleanest and the cleanest look in the finish. We didn't want it to feel like a spaghetti of mechanical systems. So with most historic restorations, the focus is typically on the exterior facade. And at Tammen Hall, a lot of interior spaces and details were also deemed historically significant. And these spaces, much of the main floor and on the upper floor corridors. So maintaining the corridors limited the team in the layouts of each unit. Not only the walls of the corridor, but the original door openings were required to be preserved. That's how significant this building was. Those details were still there, and they still wanted to be harnessed and recognized through its years. The team worked to create creative solutions to maintain those openings, to keep those visible, but also to maintain the fire ratings that are required within those spaces. One of the other challenges in the layout was the units on the 2nd floor, and particularly the units that are above the community room. As you'll see a little later, the community room is definitely the heart of the building. It has this very ornate, very decorative ceiling that we just did not even want to touch. So it required us to be creative in those layouts to make sure that we didn't disturb the ceiling and that those systems were really far away from it and didn't impact it. So as I started talking about the community room, it's located on the 1st floor, right off of the main foyer area. And this room was the heart of the building. It had an original fireplace that was marble, that was exquisite, the ceiling details, and then just the vision that this building had was really developed within that community room. With that community room, again, it was really creative in how we lit the room, how we heated and cooled the room. All of that was done very systematically to maintain the historical integrity of that space. So one big issue as it relates to life safety with this building is it was categorized as a high-rise. What that means is that the height of the building required other systems. This also incurred more cost and special systems for evacuation, in both the stairwells and in the elevator shafts. As part of that requirement is a fire command center. This room is required to be located on the main floor, for 200 square feet. The only logical space that would house a space of this size and not be detrimental to the other historical elements was in the theater. The theater was also located on the 1st floor, but was significant in size. We were able to create it in a creative manner, locate that room, not impact the look and the feel of the theater, so that it was still usable for functions for the residents. As the design progression was ramping up, the team on our side, which included the design team, the pre-construction, we all met with the engineers, design, and the subcontractors. We spent a lot of time in that building. I think we spent months in that building. And what it really was is to really just coordinate. It was easier to coordinate on site than it is in our desks and on our computers. It's efficient just to go to the site, live it, breathe it, and just kind of coordinate your way through. And I think that is what is special about how we bring on our partners and how we engage the subcontractors, the engineers, everybody, is that we are hands-on. We want to go in there and we want to just make sure we open up the walls, uncover what we can, and just kind of dial it in. What it does is it also allows us to just check in. How are we doing on budget? How are we doing on schedule? What impacts are the findings that we are uncovering going to impact that? We work very closely together as an internal team within design, just to make sure we're always checking that. It's always in our utmost interest to maintain the budget and the schedule. So as part of this building, we really wanted to make sure we were providing 21st century living. When we think of 21st century living, and the standard accommodations that come with that, we think of efficient heating and air conditioning system, efficient appliances, water conserving fixtures, Wi-Fi. This building has all of those without taking away from the historical nature of the building. But for those that are living in this building and living their senior years, they also want a sense of security and a sense of community. This building in its location provides so much of that. And it also provides secure entrances to make sure that they are feeling in that way. Many of the amenities that are included in this building is, as I mentioned, the community room on the first floor, the theater, and then when I move up to the 8th floor, another amazing feature is the rooftop patio to allow them to have connection to the outdoors and a view to the skyline and the western slopes. So if I get down into the nitty-gritty when we started construction, the unknown started quite early. And a major abatement effort that Greg alluded to required removal of radiators and pipe insulation, much more than what we ever had noted in the reports. Even though there was that report, the unknown seemed to creep up from behind. The asbestos was that first big hit. And not only with the work for the abatement, but also the cost to infill and to reconstruct those lost elements. It was a huge effort for us to just kind of go through, categorize what was abated and what needs to be put back. One significant space was in the theater. Much of the ornate structure had to be removed, and that was definitely a cost that was required to replace. A few other surprises is the ceilings. So initially we met as a group with MGL and we said, we're gonna leave the ceilings and we're gonna patch them and they're gonna look beautiful. Well, we went through demo, we took down the walls and we noticed they're not as beautiful as they appear. They were unlevel, they had a lot of scars from the demo, and they required so much more work than we would have ever thought to get them back to being flush, clean, and in acceptable condition. And in a similar fashion as when we looked at the floors. So we thought we were going to have a nice, clean, smooth concrete floor. And again, that just wasn't the reality. Those walls definitely showed the brunt of the demo, which required a lot of grinding, a lot of filling. And that was another big hit to the project. That was something that we walked numerous times with Kurt and saying, Kurt, what do you want to do? What do you want to do here? And we looked at every condition as its own. Some required less and some required more. And we really worked together on defining that. It wasn't something that we defined for the project, but we defined it together in what we needed to do. So Greg mentioned briefly around contingencies. And this is where we start to track, and these unknowns start creeping up, and we start looking back on contingencies. Now, on the Neenan side, we have a contingency, and then also MGL holds a contingency. And it's really a finite, orchestrated effort on how we use those contingency funds and in what manner. And we, on the Neenan side, we use a lot of those contingencies on unknowns, and then we also use them on design defects. If there was something that we missed within the design that is a code requirement, we look at those kinds of things. I'd like to open it up to Danny and Greg as well to kind of speak to their side of the ownership side around contingencies and how that was managed for this project.
in a renovation, we like to have at least 15% on the owner contingency side. Now that's a huge number, especially in an affordable housing project to accommodate. So we're typically at least 10, but we're not willing to go there unless we have a great deal of confidence in a couple of things. And one is the scope, and then secondarily, maybe some alternative fund sources we could bring to the table, or a cushion in a low-income housing tax credit deal of developer fees, so we know that we can complete the project. These renovations are just far more challenging than new construction, and that's the one takeaway that I would suggest to the group if anyone's contemplating whether it's historic or not. Historic just adds a whole nother level of complexity because of the requirements and what you can do. But renovations in and of themselves are very difficult to budget. And again, a really adequate contingency in excess of 10% is ideal. In some projects, we've actually run a contingency as much as 20% on smaller projects. So the percentage is less relevant than the absolute dollars, you know, in a small project.
Thank you, Greg. So I'm quickly going to run through the plans just to kind of give a circle back on as we develop the plans and kind of what we were looking for. Most of the white, as you see, is really the areas of historic significance. And then the areas that are shaded in the gray is the new layouts that the units have served. So this layout is the second floor. This is representing the floors up through the 7th floor, and then this is the upper level with the rooftop patio. And then this is just a quick little design image for that courtyard that's in between the two wings. So this is kind of the demo phase. This is what we were up against. It definitely looked like a bomb had happened. It was definitely a level of destruction. There was a level of flooring removal. And this is when the building got either scary or interesting. So it was kind of a fun phase as far as the creativity and just also just starting to uncover some of the unknowns. So not all of the findings are bad. There was a point in time after abatement when the flooring had been removed and we started to uncover some terrazzo. This really excited myself and also Kurt, because we were just excited to see some terrazzo. And so what we did is we really diligently worked together to find the perfect subcontractor that's going to come in and really repair and finish the terrazzo. This terrazzo was located in much of the corridors on the upper floors, as well as in the community room. So it was just a great enhancement to the building and the design to uncover that once forgotten gem. I'd like to start to talk, so you can kind of start to see some of the finishings of the main spaces, the exterior facade, which created an extensive amount of brick cleaning and those tuck pointing and those repairs. This is the courtyard, which once housed just debris and just a lot of forgotten beauty within this space. It's really a space within the city that's in a calm, great design. This is the entry foyer. As you can see, the terrazzo is in just exceptional condition. The light fixtures that are original, and we did extensive repair to the mailbox. At one point in time, it had been significantly damaged when someone had broken into the building. And then these are a few of the finished pictures of the units. We really tried hard as a design team to really emphasize the windows and the daylight and really capture the views and the essence of that. And then this is a view from the rooftop onto the skyline. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time about the murals. Partway through the design, Kurt invited us to go and meet with the, excuse me, with the Western Center for Conservation of Fine Arts. They worked diligently with the Children's Hospital to preserve these murals. So these murals originally were located in the Founders Room, located on the 2nd floor. That Founders Room lost a lot of its original historic detailing, and at the time of design, it was better used as apartments, and so that was renovated to that use. The murals at the time of vacating had been removed not in a proper manner, which they received a great amount of damage. Children's Hospital took it upon themselves to hire the art conservationists to really repair and bring these murals back to life. It was children's hope and dream that as the building was sold and renovated, that these murals would find their way back. So when we first initially met with them, we took measurements of them, and they really wanted to challenge us on where do we put these murals. They're really quite large, but they have so much homage of history to not just this building, but to Alan Tupper True as an artist, and then also just the history he brings to Colorado. Much of his work is located throughout the Capitol building and other major buildings within the city. So it was really important to create a space that really brought them back and enhanced them in their new space. It was a very diligent effort between Neenan and the art conservationists to make sure that we really understood how we were going to mount these. We needed to mount them to protect them and not do any additional harm to them. And then also the lighting, to make sure that the lighting was really well lit for the size of the murals, and it really casted the beauty within. So one thing that Kurt and I had done is when these murals really started to bring life to this building, we talked about the name of the community room, and we thought it was really important to dedicate this space to Alan Tupper True. The significance of his work and to this building we thought was really important, and so this room has been dedicated to his legacy, and I think that it shows well and is a great asset for the building and for the residents. And I'd like to open it up if Greg and Danny have any other comments as far as the space and other uses throughout the building.
I was just going to make a quick comment about how lucky we are that we have these fantastic community spaces for our residents. This type of work we could never afford now in a new construction project. This is so unique to a historic building. And we're so thankful for Neenan and Children's Hospital for helping us really kind of bring it back to life, especially with the murals. But there's a beautiful theater on the first floor, and just the hallways in general. I mean, they have the original light fixtures, these fabulous Art Deco light fixtures and high ceilings and the beautiful terrazzo floors. And then if you go up to the 8th floor, like Michelle mentioned, there's just a fantastic roof deck. There's an interior room for people to play cards and have community meetings. And then there's this rooftop that looks out over the city skyline and the mountains. And it's just incredibly unique and something that in our wildest dreams, we don't think that we could do this unless to develop a building like that, unless it was renovating and reusing a building. So
I really don't have anything else to add other than the fact that, you know, Denver is kind of a new city in a lot of ways. And unfortunately, a lot of our historic buildings were demolished downtown to create, you know, massive parking, and then those have now become skyscrapers. But in some neighborhoods around Denver, there are hidden gems, much like Tammen Hall. And, you know, there's other assets that are less old, but they now qualify for historic renovation. And just something to keep an eye out for, as Danny mentioned, to repurpose a building and utilize that incredible investment, you know, many years ago without having to reinvest in, in all of those components to these assets. I mean, they're just tremendous. And, in doing so, as you evaluate those, the parting advice from me would be, again, really bring on early a great consultant team. And Neenan was clearly that, from the PCNA, physical conditions report, through the early design. But then also, same thing on the financing side. Really, you need to make sure that you've identified really good financial partners that understand the risk inherent in these sorts of assets, that will stand by you. And then, of course, lastly, your development team. We've been fortunate enough to have gone through in the past a couple of renovations. This was not our first. I would say this was maybe the most challenging, because just of the fact that it was historic and it was small and it was affordable. So the amount of resources that we could bring to the table were sort of finite, which again made Neenan's job that much more difficult. But I think these are, again, just tremendous assets. There are other opportunities throughout the metropolitan area and certainly Colorado as well. And if you have any questions, I would encourage you to reach out to Neenan, Michelle. Certainly, we here at MGL are happy to refer on any consultants and lessons learned going through this process.
I think the other side, from a designing contractor side of it, as a design builder, it's really important, the partnership that we had with him. I appreciated working with Kurt. He was a partner. He wasn't just the developer. He wasn't just the client. He was really a true partner in all of this, and that's really a part of what makes a project like this successful, is that we listen to each other, we engage in the conversation, and we stick with the conversation. As we had many tough conversations through this project, it was not easy, but because we listened to each other and we took each other's advice in the different areas that we needed to, is really what makes these projects successful. And being able to be a part of that is just the most humbling experience. I enjoyed it. I had fun. This project continues to really get recognized in its efforts, and it's really a testament to this team, and it's a testament to the project. And so this is a list of the awards that this project has been recognized for, and I'm sure that there's more. And I think it's a complete asset to Denver and the surrounding community.
So I need to unmute.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you so much. I'm going to remind the participants, if you have a question, you'll see the questions box. Just go ahead and type that in there and we'll monitor those. I do have one coming in. First one is, if Greg's still here, I think, or Danny, what trends do you see coming in affordable housing funding and tax credits?
Hello.
Hi.
Did you hear that question?
No, sorry, can you please repeat it?
Sure. What trends do you see coming in affordable housing funding and tax credits?
Do I start?
1 second.
Sure.
Sorry, we're having technology issues. We had that nice
The way
echo.
it goes.
It's working, but the audio is not, or the video is not. What trends do I see? I think uncertainty, for a little bit is what is the name that I'm hearing a lot come up in that discussion, or the adjective. We have an election. Clearly, there may be some changes in Congress, and so there are a number of things on the table that may help, but could also hurt. I mean, if we continue with the same structure that we have now, I think pricing is probably going to trend down slightly, just because tax liabilities will be a little bit lower and therefore demand lower. If there's some changes politically, there may be a lock on the 4%.
That would be huge.
Which would be huge. That would help a lot of bond deals. And I think that, you know, as we all know, the Democrats would like to increase corporate rates, and that probably is going to lead to higher liabilities, despite, you know, what's going on economically, which will increase demand and therefore pricing. So, I mean, that's just big picture, my thought. I don't know if you have other ones, Danny.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as the election kind of settles, you know, and there's more relief packages released, there might be something in there for affordable housing or rent relief or something like that that can help properties from an operating perspective or from a development perspective. But Greg's right, you know, tax credit pricing right now is very much all over the place and low. And you know, we're hoping for some new sources or a lock on the 4% in 2021.
Great, thank you. Here's another one. Michelle, you mentioned another project like this. What was it? And can you explain what is Archistruction?
I'll start with the other project that Neenan was involved with, and it was the Tabor Grand Hotel that is located up in Leadville. That project was actually already kind of laid out for apartments and for use, and so really it was just a revitalization of that. And then it had extensive exterior, so that was a little bit of a difference with that project, but it also went through the same kind of processes as far as low-income tax credits and also state and national historic recognition and tax credit incentives. Describing Archistruction, so it's kind of what you hear. It's the architects and then the construction staff all in one house, one building. The teams are situated where they all sit together. We sit right next to the PM, we sit next to pre-con during those phases. That way we can really hear and listen to what the conversations are and make sure that we're always on the same page, or just, you know, if we hear something, we can, you know, inquire and ask. I think collaboration and working together, it just comes natural to Neenan since we are in the same building and we support and design and coordinate to a budget, and it's the budget that is, you know, aligned to and outlined with the clients, and it just comes natural to us. I think that sometimes we don't realize how we just kind of operate on a day-to-day basis, and so it makes it a little bit more fun.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. All right, here's one. Beautiful property, great presentation. A high-rise, age-restricted community isn't an ideal combination during this pandemic. How is operation and management going?
Operations and management are doing well. We fortunately have not had any COVID cases in the building, and I think that that's due to the fact that we have been very conscious about keeping the place clean and sanitized. Unfortunately, we have not had, we've not been able to do a lot of the kind of community get-togethers that we'd like to do, you know, puzzles and, you know, maybe a guest lecturer or, you know, kind of card afternoons, that kind of a thing. You know, all of those activities have been put on pause, but, you know, for the most part, the building has been kept very sanitized. The leasing staff is available by appointment, and, you know, the operations are running very well.
Great. Do you, it's kind of a tag on, do you see any shifts related to COVID, you know, from funding or building and design system standpoint moving forward?
Definitely. We've been seeing several different things. You know, retrofitting buildings is certainly more of a challenge, but putting in different air filtration systems. I'm not as savvy on the names of them, but, you know, basically to kind of circulate the air and, you know, I'm not sure I'm losing my
Well, there's some antiviral technology.
antiviral
Yeah,
technology.
that can be retrofitted onto existing systems.
Mhm.
I'm sure a lot of the people on this call have been talking with their architects and HVAC consultants to look at the options. And, you know, like everything over the last 8 months, it started slowly. And of course, every day there are more and more options that come out. And for brand new systems, I think there's even more robust capability to clean it, whether it's, you know, electronically in combination with filtration, et cetera. So yeah, we're constantly looking at those, like many of the people on the call, I'm sure, and we'll design. I think the change in the future is those systems are designed to incorporate that technology because, you know, unfortunately, it's probably not the last pandemic we may see. Hopefully, it's one of the worst for a while, but you know, we'll learn from it.
We've also been looking at doing doing site-wide Wi-Fi, but a higher level of Wi-Fi so people can stream, and, you know, it's, you know, not quite as relevant in senior buildings, but distance learning and, you know, working remotely, that kind of a thing, to do webinars such as this. You know, in new construction, there's several more options. You know, making sure that all 2-bedroom units have 2 bathrooms. So, you know, if one member of the family is sick, you know, they can make sure that they have the whole area of the apartment that's kind of their own space. You know, we are certainly open and exploring with our architects right now, and curious to see what best practices come out of this next several months, especially during the winter.
Right. Right. I think we have time for one more. How do you assess other existing buildings to see if they will work for affordable housing? Who would like to take that?
Assess other buildings to see if they'll work for affordable housing.
You know, I think that's a very hard question. You know, one of the topics that you hear a lot lately is retrofitting office space that is now maybe no longer as great a demand as before. You know, we've learned to work remotely, so I don't think it's any secret that a lot of offices throughout the country are largely vacant right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I know a lot of people are talking about that. It really just depends on the building itself. I mean, all buildings are somewhat unique, and I think the best advice I would say is to bring someone, you know, like Nina and Michelle, your design team, especially the HVAC guys and plumbing, because they're so expensive. In order, you know, and you need to look at clearances and capacity just to see what retrofit options are available. And, you know, Tammen was a challenge because we were constrained by not just the building structural and physical constraints, but then also the historical changes, modifications that we were allowed to make. So that one honestly was one of the harder ones. And that's why it yielded, despite the fact it's such a relatively large building, 49 units, the upside of that is there's a lot of common area.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I just think it's a case-by-case evaluation. And I would just really recommend that the team is identified early to come in with the development team to just identify all the gotchas. And also don't forget about asbestos as well, because we had that as well. And many of these older buildings require a substantial level of abatement, and that's just a sunk cost. You know, I mean, it's gone. There's no benefit from that other than the health benefit, of course, but there's no amenity benefit for that large expenditure, and it limits what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. All right, we have a minute left. Any final comments before we wrap it up today? No?
Any final comment?
So,
You know, I would just say, I think
Go ahead,
it's
Greg.
incredibly challenging, but they're so rewarding. I mean, when you see those pictures, and, you know, again, I kind of alluded to it in part of the presentation, so did Michelle, just there's so many complications. Renovations are inherently much more challenging than new construction. And, you know, I think the key recommendation is to really identify areas of contingency and continue to hold those throughout the project, not just the uses side, but also the sources side. So if, you know, we continue to go down this path, what other resources can we possibly bring to the table? And, you know, Tammen was a perfect example of that. And, you know, kudos to SCL for helping us at the kind of 11th hour. We ended up having a manageable gap, but it was a meaningful amount of financing that they helped provide. So that constant communication, and, you know, honestly, when we look at renovations, as crazy as this may sound, we actually start with a contingency in the initial pro forma closer to 20%, because it just gets eaten up. And then by the time you get to close, you're like, well, now I've got 8 to 10%, which is still reasonable, but you go through it.
But we encourage you to try your hand at them. I mean, there's nothing inherently more sustainable than redeveloping a building that is already in existence and, you know, improving the existing community. I mean, I think that I walk around that area often, and Tammen Hall is just this gleaming beacon, and it just looks so fantastic. And I feel so proud, and I know that people in the neighborhood feel the same way. It really elevated the area around it, and it will consistently do that. And anytime you kind of spend time and renovate an older building.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to the presenters today. We appreciate it. I wish you all a great day. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.